All right, welcome to the Sea Mask podcast, where we are reclaiming masculinity for Christianity. Mike, good to see you.
You as well, Will. Let's get right into this. This is going to be a banger of an episode. So we're going to touch on a few different things, but this was prompted by a specific question from a viewer. So we'll jump right into it. So the guy said, "How not to be apathetic in brackets about everything as a young single guy." Number one, 2 years as a baptized Catholic, nothing really gets me out of bed besides work, and the apathy has creeped into my prayer life and not finishing my rosary, morning, night prayer, etc. In the moment, I feel like a dumbass writing this, but in the moment, it's hard to care. I know it's me and God problem, so I'm going to go to adoration or something. Thank you for the great info. Just need to apply it as I've taken notes on it. So this is interesting. I don't think there is really a such thing as apathy. I think there are 2 points that St. Thomas dove into in the Summa very, very well. The first one is effeminacy. People get the definition of this one really wrong. He describes it as an excessive attachment to pleasure or comfort that leads a person to avoid difficulties or hardships they ought to face for the sake of virtue or duty. But I think this is more so related to, I think if I'm pronouncing this correctly, acedia, which is a sorrow or aversion to spiritual good, particularly the effort required for pursuing virtue or communion with God. It is a vice opposed to the virtue of charity, characterized by a lack of joy in divine things or a spiritual laziness that leads one to neglect duties toward God and others. He describes it as a sorrow for spiritual good that makes a person sluggish in performing acts of virtue, often due to the perceived difficulty or lack of immediate pleasure in them. I know this completely aligns with your thoughts on this real quick, and we're going to dive into, I think, 5 specific points. Right off the bat, what would you, without getting into these points, which we will directly, what would you say to this guy right off the hop?
Let's think about the difference between apathy and sloth and depression. I find that a lot of guys, when they talk about feeling this way, are confused between all of those. Now, you can be depressed and not really have much wrong with your spiritual life in many cases. Sometimes God will just let you have dry spells, and there are very good reasons for that, and you can really grow from them spiritually. However, this kind of sloth or acedia is different from that. It's when you don't actually care much about putting in the hard work to go after the spiritual goods that God has promised for you. And that's very different from depression, because depression can just be a feeling that is happening to you, whereas this is really something to do with the will. Do you actually want to put in the work to achieve what God wants you to achieve? So that's always my first thought when guys talk about how they are feeling, and if they're feeling down, do they mean depression, or do they mean that nothing seems like it's worth working for?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think most men should almost look at this as somewhat of a positive sign in their spiritual lives. Father Ripperger often talks about that when you're receiving tremendous amounts of consolation, that you're receiving all these good feelings and joy in your interior life, that God's just trying to draw you in. You're at like the dog food bowl level of your sanctification. And what's a common thread amongst all the great saints is that there's this prolonged period of sort of spiritual dryness. But the difference between, let's say guys like this, or many of us that go through dry spells, and the saints, is that the saints endured through that time. And if anything, they doubled down on prayer and discipline and restrained themselves exteriorly and interiorly to fight this acedia, to fight this effeminacy, to fight this kind of, the first thing that came to mind was sloth. This guy is seeing the weight of the cross on the floor and not wanting to bear the weight. He feels like he can't bear the weight. And I think it's relevant that we jump into these 5 points and how to combat this. But really, at the end of the day, it's got to come down to desire. And another thing, too, is, do you want God to show up in your life the way that you want him to, or the way that God should show up in your life? Meaning, maybe I should explain that better. We think God is a genie in a bottle, and we want him to conform to our lives versus us conforming to God. So the number one thing here, of course, is prayer. And specifically, I think there's a tremendous lack of meditative interior prayer with a lot of men. I know this in myself. I posted a tweet yesterday. Shout out to Enoch. He was like, "Hey, there's been a lot of Catholic men's courses and telling guys to do cold showers, etc." He goes, "How about I challenge you to 15 minutes of interior prayer, just meditation?" So And then in my response was, cool, I've deadlifted 805, kind of hard, pretty cool, whatever. But my inability or my lack of wanting to do this and how difficult and arduous it is has revealed an effeminacy in me that I would have never been able to discover without Catholicism. So if he can't finish a rosary, I mean, logically, we'd have to start with that. Logically, we'd have to start with, well, I would also ask this guy, if he's one of my coaching clients, how frequently are you going to confession to receive the graces of confession? A lot of people maintain that they should only go for mortal sins, and it's not technically like wrong, but I think everybody should review that list that I keep harping on and repeating over and over again. The 8 reasons, this is Pope Pius XII, why we should be frequenting the sacrament. So number one, you can't finish your rosary. Start by finishing your rosary. Start by actually continuing your prayer. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. You don't have to start with an hour of prayer per day or 45 minutes per day if you're not, that's not where you're at spiritually. Finishing your rosary, doing something simple like the Angelus at 6 a.m., 12 p.m., and 6 p.m., these little prayers throughout the day, that is enough to at least break the cycle of sloth, because what happens is you lose momentum. And it's like anything in life. If you lose momentum with prayer, you lose momentum with training, it's really hard to get it going again. But what choice do we have? We have to get it going again. What do you think about that, Will?
Yeah, so true about the momentum and the habit. I think it was St. Augustine who said that if you don't live as you believe, then you'll start to believe as you live. And if you're someone who doesn't take confession seriously, doesn't take prayer seriously, then that's going to change your whole outlook on your life, seep into everything about you. And it's a great goal to pray the rosary every day. Yes, it's not a strict requirement from the church, but it's a great goal and many people find it useful. However, you might not be there yet, and it's okay to start smaller. Rather than continually disappointing yourself, maybe you can just say something slightly shorter, like a few Hail Marys, or you can say the Our Father. Start with something that is achievable for you and just build momentum with that. That's okay. It's a bit like being back in the gym after an injury. Sometimes you have to start with just the empty bar. You can't go back to what you were doing before. And that process of recognizing your weakness is humbling, and that's also really useful for you. But what you're talking about there is basically training habits. And that's what the whole spiritual life is about. And I really like the way that you link that to habit formation physically as well, because hylomorphism means that we aren't just souls in bodies, we are the two combined. That's what makes a whole human being.
Yeah, this reminds you a lot of somebody that's really undertrained or is thinking about getting to the gym but hasn't gotten there yet, or he's a newbie. And I think it's a great point, because if you spend any length of time on social media, there's a lot of piety sprawl, right? You've got to pray the rosary. It's like we're kind of, and I don't mean to use like, feminine verbiage here, but laying burdens upon other people where we're all in different stages of our interior lives. So you make a great point. If the rosary is simply too arduous for you right now, and it's actually getting you to not do any of your other prayers, it's similarly to trying to get into the gym 4 days a week, 5 days a week, and just smash yourself and you can't continue with that. Well, I think it would be imprudent to try to push through that. It's just going to discourage you further. So to your point, make your prayers bite-sized pieces, 2-3 minutes at a time. If you feel so inclined that you want to pray that rosary, break it up throughout the day. Do a couple decades when you feel inclined to do so, finish it later on. These micro prayers, it does help build momentum tremendously. It's like that guy that starts lifting weights once per week. Well, eventually he's going to be inspired and motivated to go 2 or 3 times per week, and the next thing you know, he's in a really good spot with his habits. One thing that has been very fruitful for me that maybe I'll try to convince this guy to do even 5 minutes of is either downloading the Examine app. It's based off of the St. Ignatius of Loyola prayers, or simply just doing the narrated meditation courses on Hallow, which you can get down to like 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. Meditation is a really underrated prayer, especially in the modern age where everything is so noisy. Father Ripperger also talked about that, in order to, well, at least strive toward the lumative way, and get past this purgative phase that we're all just in perpetuity, it feels like. We've got to do some kind of internal meditative prayer. I have experienced such tremendous fruit through Lent doing 10 minutes of meditation every night, but maybe it's 3 or 4 minutes for this guy every night. And having that internal dialogue with God or just silence with God has produced a lot of fruit that even after stopping, it's still continuing in my life. But then I noticed there were sins that I continually were bringing to confession, and there was a reminder that I need to get back to some meditative prayer. But back to your point, to make it really simple, if a rosary is too arduous, break up your prayer into bite-sized pieces. Doesn't matter how much time you're praying per day. The point is to start praying.
And also recognize that the culture that you've been raised in and are surrounded by is actually encouraging this apathy in you. It's encouraging you to be passive and always seeking for the next thing to scroll or be entertained by. And shutting that out and creating that kind of stillness and silence and really focusing on what you want to work for and why, rather than just being this passive consumer who's always wanted to be entertained. That's a big mental shift. So have some patience with yourself as you make that. The fact that you are aware of feeling this way and you're not happy about it is a great first step, but don't expect to be able to get out of it without some kind of growing pains. So just expect that as part of the process and don't wish it away. Rather, just let it transform you and think of it as like the weakness being burnt out of you. Yes, it is going to be difficult to start some of these routines that Mike's recommending. Why would you expect it to be otherwise? It's going against the grain of everything you've been surrounded by. So it will be tough to begin with, but that's okay. In fact, it's good because you need the toughness.
Progressive overload for the soul. You got to start small and build up. So that leads naturally to the second point, which is discipline. I see a lot of cope from guys online that, what matters most is the spiritual life, which is absolutely true. But if we're not learning to restrain our appetites and restrain and mortify our flesh, then we are going to be stuck in a certain level of our spiritual life as well. So this guy didn't provide a lot of context, but if he's not currently lifting weights or fasting or doing something that's physically arduous, right? I think these things have to meet. St. Paul talks about restraining himself. Part of that is in the physical as well. We're not just spiritual beings. We're human beings. Just you referenced Aristotle. We're hylomorphic. We're form and matter. So restraining the appetite is incredibly important. So this guy, if he hasn't done anything, or if anybody's listening is struggling with something similar, I think especially if you're a man, if you're not doing anything with yourself, with your body, something physically arduous, producing something, even going and working with your hands, naturally sloth is going to kick in. So I tell any guy, especially Catholics, grace perfects nature, and the physical conforms to the operations of the soul. That is a quote directly from St. Thomas. Then you're leaving a lot of potential room for sanctification on the table. Start lifting weights, go out into nature, walk daily, cold showers, pick a day where you're going to fast. And when I say fast, a lot of guys really go to the most extreme versions of fasting. That could simply mean the church guided fast, which is one meal and then two small meals that don't, add up to one meal in a given day. If you feel so inclined, just fast from dinner time to dinner time. When I was starting up, learning how to fast and restrain that appetite, building that virtue of temperance, I was fasting from whenever dinner is, 5 or 6 p.m. to the next evening. So I'm not going to bed starving, and I know a meal is coming the next day. And yeah, I was a bit effeminate that I had to start that way, but I had to start that way. Do something physically arduous. It doesn't mean you have to become a power lifter or a bodybuilder or anything like that. You're doing crazy amounts of fasting, but doing something that is physically challenging, because your soul knows how to distinguish between something that's cheap, free, and easy when it comes to dopamine and something that's really hard, right? And I think, you quoted Augustine. What was that quote one more time?
If we do not live as we believe, then we'll believe as we live.
That's so well put, and it relates to this directly. If you were talking to a complete beginner, this is what I would tell anybody that would begin coaching with me. It's like, if we're not starting small when it comes to prayer, if we're not starting small when it comes to these little physical disciplines, you're just going to burn out. We need to keep the big picture in mind. And this is something that reminds me of how the Eastern Europeans train, right? And I admire them, because here in the West, in North America, we don't think this way. They think in macro cycles that last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And there's periods of, training very little, doing very little, but building up to much over a long period of time. So if you're just keeping the immediate week, month, 3 months. I I think that's taking too short-sighted of a view. What would you tell a guy like this? If he's, let's say, let's just presume he's doing nothing. How would you tell him to start?
Look at all the things that give you pleasure, the things that you know are encouraging this kind of passivity and apathy, where you're not really putting in the effort you should to go after some of those really challenging spiritual goals that God has set for you. You know, if you think about heaven being at the top of a very difficult to climb mountain, and you're just hanging out, wallowing right at the base of it because something feels good down there, and you don't like the look of the hard climb. What are some of those things that you do spend your time on? For example, it could just be doom scrolling, or it might be getting into thumb wars in the comments on X, something like that. Deny yourself some of those little pleasures. Start to notice the difference in your life after you cut them out. Once you've developed that basic willpower, and it might be that you need an app like Shift, for example, which actually cuts those things out because otherwise it's too tempting for you to actually get a hold of them again. It might be that you need that. But after you've got that basic ability to deny yourself little things, then do something like Mike is recommending. Get to the gym, try some more fasting, or take your prayer life up a notch so that you're building in a little bit more difficulty there. Overcome that, feel yourself get stronger, and then you'll realize that actually you can have the confidence in yourself with God's help that those things that seem too tough for you to go after before or not worth it, they're worth it because they are hard. We hear things like men do hard things all the time, so often, it's just parroted, but we don't really appreciate the depth of it because there's nothing harder than getting to heaven, right? There's nothing harder than getting to heaven. That's your main goal in life. You have to understand that everything else you are training yourself for to be able to do hard things, that's what we want it for. If something isn't helping you getting to heaven, what really is the point of it? My parish priest made that point a while back. I've always remembered it. If it's not helping you get to heaven, why are you doing it? So just have that as like your North Star for your life and assess everything you do in the light of that.
It's well said. I think also where this comes from is a perception of weakness. And a lot of times guys don't want to look at it straight in the face, where the sloth comes from, like, well, I feel weak, I am weak, I can't do this, I am weak, over and over and over again. It's like this self-perpetuating cycle. I mean, the only way, I mean, it comes down to this too. When I work with guys, and many guys come to me for, trying to break the habit of pornography. Let's just kind of cut straight to the chase before the other points here. We could outline all of the perfect tools to start building momentum physically, spiritually, etc. If you don't do them, it simply comes down to doing these things. Like, I could give a guy all the resources in the world to stop, gooning and stop watching pornography. If he simply just doesn't want to stop doing it, he's not going to stop. Like, I remember there's a conversation I had when I was struggling with alcohol, and this might be overly simplistic, but I almost fired this therapist that I was seeing. And, I don't recommend therapy. This was a season of life of mine before I was Catholic. And there was a number of months we were working together, and he says, well, why don't you just try not drinking for a week? And I almost fired him right there on the spot. But in that is a simplicity that is kind of profound. It really comes down to a choice. Like, we could outline this, and if you're like, nah, and you pity yourself and you think you're so weak you can't do it, okay, then just stay there. It comes down to a simple choice. You pick up the cross or you don't. And I think a lot of guys really need to be smacked in the face with that reality, which leads naturally into this third point of brotherhood. We do need to be smacked in the face with reality. And a lot of that for guys is going to come from brotherhood. One of the most distinct moments in my coming back to the church was, Will, you called me a heretic. And it was great because it worked. It made me really look at myself and say, yeah, I'm actually being kind of weak. I'm not wanting to commit to this because I have to find the perfect answer. The answer was already within me, and I had to take that leap, and I took that leap, and God filled in the rest. And so if you don't have a group of strong Catholic men, you could find them online or you can find them in person, ideally in person, that are able to not just shine light on you and support you and shoulder the burden when you're down, but also just to call you out on your effeminacy and your weakness. You're leaving a lot of potential improvement on the table. I've seen the folly of being solo. We're not meant to be islands unto ourselves. Oftentimes, Satan wants us isolated. We're meant to be in community and fellowship with men. No women around, going and doing things that are arduous, speaking about things that are difficult, speaking truth into one another in love. And true charity means calling your brothers out, which you did so well, Will. So I guess the question is too, because a lot of guys are going to ask this: where would you find such guys?
I like the fact you said in person in particular. Look in your local parish church. Talk to some more guys. Whether you're married or single, make the effort to connect. And if you haven't got a men's group, start one, right? You be the one. You want one, so you actually get it in motion. And if you can't find enough people in your local area, then you can look online. So all of us here on CMask want to encourage this. So Mike has a group on school, so do I. You can engage with us. You can engage with us on social media too. And we know that that is enough to help some guys get the push that they need to take action on this, which is great. It's why we're here. Everything we're doing on CMask is about trying to get guys to heaven. It's a spiritual work of mercy because that's what people ultimately need. So don't be passive. Look for connections. Look for support. Recognize that the four wounds of original sin in human nature, weakness, ignorance, malice, concupiscence, mean that you shouldn't be surprised that you find this difficult. You should have the wisdom and the humility to recognize that you're weak in all kinds of ways and not just avoid occasions of sin, but also seek counsel and support from other people to make you stronger. Mike mentioned the importance of prayer. You can also make your prayers super specific. God already knows what you need better than you do. But the point of making your prayer extremely specific is so that you can bring to mind with full clarity exactly what it is that you're looking for. So ask God for the kind of help that you need to be able to make progress, because often he's going to work through human beings because he wants to involve us in this great, exciting adventure of salvation. So make that prayer and then he will help you because he always keeps his promises. Brotherhood matters, and you are leaving progress that could be yours on the table by not seeking it. Now, Mike, I feel that deep down, one of the reasons for this sloth is that people don't actually know the depths of the faith well enough. The reason they're not excited about these spiritual goals that God wants us to go after is that they don't really understand the danger they are in and also the glory of what he has promised for us and what our duties are, not just to him and to ourselves, but to each other as well. And I feel like a lot of the crisis of masculinity, which you're doing great work to help overcome, and we're all trying to fight in different ways, is actually due to weak catechesis. I can't think from back when I was in school of any really powerful atheist arguments that just blew me away. It made me think, well, that's it. Christianity is obviously nonsense. I was just very poorly informed about what it actually is, what the arguments for it are, and why men need it. And as I've been learning more about it and sharing those things with other men, I found out that is actually a pretty common experience.
Yeah, it really is. And one word of warning, because I speak about this a lot too. There's going to be a tendency toward over consuming apologetics content and then distracting yourself from the actual practice of the faith. Remember the order of priority. Your interior life, your practice of your faith is far more important than like learning about your faith. However, in its proper order, to your point, Will, learning about your faith can truly deepen your faith. Especially, I mean, not that women aren't intellectual, but men, we possess that in greater, degrees of magnitude for sure. We have an appreciation and deep love. It's intrinsically masculine to have an intellectual affinity for a certain topic. And so I would encourage a lot of men that if you don't know why you believe what you believe or why you practice what you practice, find a saint, a certain aspect of church history that interests you, and take a deep dive on that specific topic. This was part of the reason I came back to the church. It was an intellectual ascent. It was an intellectual learning process that eventually turned into a heart conversion. A lot of guys are either like way too in their feelings about prayer, which leads to sloth because they actually just don't understand why they need to do these things or why they do them, or they're way too in their heads and there's no heart, there's no practice. But if you're struggling with this, then I mean, learn about the history of your faith. Read the catechism, find a particular saint that you have a deep devotion and respect for, and dive into that. That's certainly helped deepen my faith. But again, I because YouTube is notorious for this too. It's really, really, really easy to dive too deep into the apologetic stuff, and then you forget about why you're even Catholic or what being Catholic actually means. But it is incredibly important. You know, it says it in, I can't remember if it's First or Second Peter, that we should all have a defense prepared for the faith. Understand why you do what you do, and it'll help you do what you do with a little bit more fervor, passion, and understanding. And that understanding leads to, I think, a potential for greater consistent devotion.
I love that point about not going down the rabbit hole too much. You have to know enough about the faith to be able to fulfill all your duties in your station, but that doesn't mean that you have to be someone who is like a professional apologist and then gets right into all the nuances and spends all day fighting about them. Even if you do try to do that, you might actually do more damage than good because you probably aren't as good at it as you think you are. Leave it to people who are better at it. I always recommend the Penny Catechism, which was a really great condensation of just the real core truths everyone needs to know. Originally written for young kids, but to be able to actually communicate the depths of the faith in a really clear and concise way needs someone who understands it really well. And if you're looking for somewhere to start, I would recommend that. After you've gone through it a few times and know it pretty much by heart, yeah, you might like something a bit more developed, but it's got everything you need to know. And if you start including that in your conversations as well, you'll educate other people too, and you have a duty to do that as well. And when one person teaches, two people learn. Really smart idea from Confucius. So sharing the ideas you are learning with other people is going to benefit them and also you, because you'll understand it in more depth. And that's also something that men's groups are really useful for. And the church also says that we actually need to have a reason for what we believe. Like the Catholic Church teaches that God's existence can be known with certainty by natural reason alone. Now, Protestants don't believe this. For them, faith is something where you shut your eyes really hard and then maybe you'll believe. But the Catholic Church actually says, no, you can lay out logically, rationally, with certainty why God exists. And you get to the point where you accept the teachings of the church through reason. Yes, it's a journey like Mike's was that started by God's pull on your heart. It's not just your own efforts that make you become Catholic, but he wants to actually involve your intellect in the process. So we can prove just rationally that God exists and that he founded a church after incarnating and was resurrected. That's the Catholic Church, etc., etc. And then you can accept rationally the authority of the church and then all the mysteries that you can't fully grasp rationally as a result of that. But it's all underpinned by reason. And as a man looking for answers and wanting to understand things, what more exciting intellectual edifice could you wish for? It's saying right the way down to the ground, you can grasp this thing rationally, but as it goes up towards the heavens, of course, you can't comprehend some of the mysteries because, just as a quick example, to be able to comprehend God fully in his infinity, you would need to be God, right? Even the angels, the highest angels, can't fully comprehend the infinity of God. So that makes sense logically too. It's okay for there to be mysteries, which are things that are too deep, too profound for our finite minds to grasp. But it doesn't mean there's nothing you can grasp. You can still get some of the core concepts and you can know those with certainty. You're looking for answers as a man, right? You want to be fulfilled. You want your intellect to be stretched. Catholicism gives it to you. It's not New Age mush, right? That's one of the most exciting things about it to me. It is not New Age mush. It's not Protestantism saying that God's existence can't be proven with certainty and it's just a matter of faith alone. To me, that just is New Age mush. I don't know about you, Mike, but I can't see much difference between that and believing in some kind of Gaia or Earth spirit?
Yeah, it's without getting too far down that rabbit hole, we could talk about that all day. It's in a lot of ways not even the same faith. And for anybody that wants a kill shot snippet that is put better than any way that I could possibly put it, go to our man Timothy Gordon's X channel or watch the interview with him and Elijah Schaefer, I believe, and Sarah Stock on Rift TV. And there's this, the whole interview is brilliant. There's 2 minute chunk on why, I mean, Protestantism isn't even really have, it doesn't even have like the pillars of an actual true religion. In a lot of ways, the pagan Greeks had more of a concept of actual religion because there was a sacerdotal class, there was priests, there were like sacramentals, there were blood sacrifice, etc. But Tim put it so brilliantly, and that was actually such a kill shot that I've heard from nobody when having this Protestant discussion. But without getting too far in that one, everybody should go check that out. Tim's on vacation too, by the way, guys. He hasn't quit. That's for sure. He's still with us. And for everybody asking, Nick just had too much on his plate and had to spend some more time and attention on other projects. So we wish him nothing but the best, him and his beautiful family. So I wanted to make a quick recommendation. I'm going to pull out a Will Nolan and bust out some books, the couple of books that I have around my office here. When we're talking about bite-sized devotionals, right? What's really good is I don't have a large attention span, and I know people appreciate recommendations. St. Augustine Day by Day is one that I stick to. It's a little snippet, like you literally have a little prayer per day of the year with a little, there's a snippet at the top and then the prayer at the bottom. They'll take you all of 5 minutes. If you're wanting to understand the virtues in a way that is understandable, I'm actually doing a class one time per month on the Summa. And I remember getting into this course this last month, and I had no idea what was going on. They were setting all the Aristotelian machinery and foundation before we even got into Aquinas, and they might have been as well speaking Arabic or something because it was so foreign. But this book, The Traditional Virtues, according to Saint Thomas Aquinas, brilliantly distills down some of these concepts, specifically around the virtues.
Who's the
And this is
author,
a
Mike?
great one that you can actually bring. It's the Sword and Spade. So this is by Jason M. Craig. It's the Traditional Virtues according
Nice.
to St. Thomas. I can't remember who makes the St. Augustine Day by Day one, but if you even plugged into Amazon or into Google, you'll find it. And this is great for men's groups because there's a group prompt and study with that as well. So kind of hitting the intellect, kind of hitting the heart with prayer. And if you wanted one more recommendation, read Confessions by St. Augustine. Beautiful book. Talks about his struggles, his conversion. And I think that, maybe a guy that's a little bit more in his feelings, which sometimes I guess I can be too, that really spoke to me. So I recommend those 3 books if you're wanting to at least kind of dip your toe into these things, specifically around the prayer piece and the intellect piece.
Mm.
And so this last couple of points, I guess, uh, a vision for your life. I'm kind of skipping over a point. We'll circle back to it. But having a vision, a lot of guys are floating because they actually have no idea what they want from their lives. Do they want to be married? How many kids do they want to have? Where do they want to live? What kind of home life, family life do they want to create and cultivate? What kind of parish? What does their devotional life look like? There was 3 questions when I did the Masculine Revival podcast. I have to give the guy some credit. There was 3 questions that he would ask every man. Who are you? What do you want? Where are you going? And those 3 questions really succinctly help a guy paint this picture. What helped me figure that out was figuring out who I'm not, where I don't want to go, and what I do not want. And kind of inverting it sometimes makes it a little bit easier for a guy to sort of like, map out a vision for his life. But I think a lot of guys don't even have that North Star that they're working to. I mean, heaven is the ultimate North Star, but here on earth, what do you want to achieve? What do you say about that, Will?
Yeah, it's a deep point. I think that the practice of reading the lives of the saints should be brought back because they help to actually show in a concrete way what virtuous lives look like. You look at some of the decisions made and what God shaped their lives into, and they're great as ways of grasping virtue. And you could get books that give you just one saint's life a day to read. There's tons of them available from Catholic publishers. And it might only take you 2-3 minutes a day, but you will get a massive return on your investment from that spiritually because you'll actually see what it looks like. Now, your life might not look the same as any of those. They don't look like each other's lives always because each saint, and you're all called to be saints, we all are, is going to allow God's beauty and truth and goodness to come out or shine in different ways, because you've got different gifts from someone else and there are different things you can do with them. But just looking for inspiration of what he's done with the lives of other people, how they've embraced hardship and how they've persisted with that discipline, hope, and confidence, I think that's one of the best places you can look for ideas about what to do with your own life. I've got to jump in a second, Mike, because I've got a call coming up, but it's been great to speak with you and really appreciate the book recommendations. We'll add those into the video description for people who watch live. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week.
God bless you guys. See you, Will.
Take care, Mike, and all the best for the birth of your baby too. Really looking forward to that.
I really appreciate it, man. Praise God.
All right.
See you,
Take
buddy.
care. Bye.